Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Is the U.S. government coming closer to revealing what it knows about UFOs? Is NASA's revelation this past week about a new life form a step toward disclosure? What do members of Congress think?
Hey there, and welcome to the 196th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. We're coming up on our 200th show. And then, I'm Ben, and all those loaded questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad.
Well, before we introduce our guest, I want, of course, to wish everyone a happy Hanukkah. It's well into the feast and almost over, but it is that time of December, and very happy Hanukkah to all our Jewish friends and listeners. All right. It is, of course, contest time.
Oh, yes. It's that magical time of the week. In what year was the Toad Man reported in Lancaster, England? And that was last week's question. And the winner was Kathleen O'Donnell of Smithfield, Rhode Island. And the answer was 1793.
A very odd story, and frankly, I have my doubts about its authenticity. It comes from a supposed newspaper column written in that period from a local newspaper, and just as not that I've been a journalist since the 1700s, but there's just a certain thing I learned about in history of journalism, or the style, and but about which it's written, and some of the spelling may be okay, but I don't have my doubts. But anyway, the Toad Man supposedly was some kind of a mutant who would turn up around the mill pond in Accrington in north central England, and apparently didn't care who saw it.
All right, so, well, this week's question is a little bit different. When aren't the questions a little bit different? So, in what U.S. state is the famous paranormal hotspot Skinwalker Ranch? Yeah, you think you can hail that? Call us locally at 401-766-1240, or from anywhere in the U.S. at 800-449-1240. If I don't announce a winner during the show and you still think you have a shot, drop a line to me at BennettBehindTheParanormal.com, and the winner will receive a copy of UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapons Sites by Robert Hastings, one of our recent guests.
Making his first appearance on Behind the Paranormal this evening is Steve Bassett, a leading advocate for ending the 63-year government-imposed, quote, truth embargo, unquote, regarding an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. Steve is the executive director of the Paradigm Research Group and the Political Action Committee XPPAC, or XPPAC, as we might say in Rhode Island, and the executive producer of the X Conference. His work has been extensively covered by international media. I remember recently he was president of the National Press Club for the UFOs and Nukes presentations that were presented by various military officers, one of whom was our friend Colonel Charles Halt from our Rendlesham series. There are many websites which you can find out more about Steve, primarily www.paradigmresearchgroup.org. That's PARADIGM. researchgroup.org, www.exopoliticsworld.net, and these are all posted on our website. Fax on Washington.org, x-conference.com, contact2010.com, 2010 spelled out, and xppac.org. Steve, sorry.
Thanks. Steve Bassett, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Paul, Ben, it's nice to be with you.
It's great to be with you. I understand you have a birthday coming up, so happy birthday a few days in advance.
Yes.
I'm afraid I'm at a time of life when those are not necessarily welcome events.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Okay, we got a lot to talk about tonight, Steve, and let me just give everyone our call-in numbers. And if you'd like to speak with us or Steve Bassett this evening, you can call locally in this area, 401-766-1240 or 800-449-1240. Nationally.
All right, so on Coast to Coast AM this past week, you said that some of the next WikiLeaks revelations might be about UFOs. What's the latest on that?
Well, we're assuming, of course, that your audience knows about WikiLeaks.
Okay, well, go ahead and I was going to explain it, but go ahead.
Yeah, WikiLeaks is a phenomenon of some significant importance. It's not a simple thing to get into, but let's just say that it's the first major, I think, effort to directly confront the secret complexes and the operational secrecy that has become standard within government now. This is one of the great ironies of the 20th century, in that we had an incredibly expensive Cold War between what would be an open country, a democratic country, and a totalitarian state, in order to prevent the latter from imposing its will on the former. But having won that war, since that time, massive secrecy has only increased in the West and is now a threat to democratic republics. In other words, they have found the enemy and they are them, right, to quote Pogo. And there has been almost no significant movement countering this. The secrecy reform movement has been barely room temperature from the get-go. The Federation of American Scientists have had a kind of secrecy project for many years, and they put out a regular news letter or email letter kind of letting you know some things that are happening. There has been a few very lukewarm attempts in the United States Congress to address this problem, but overall there is no anti-secrecy movement of any significant note. WikiLeaks is the first opening shot, I believe, is the opening shot in what will be a counterinsurgency effort. It's going to be messy, it's going to be ugly, and probably unpleasant in other ways. So this site, which is now 4 years old, has probably, I don't know how to describe it. I've never seen a reaction by the United States government to anything like this. It far exceeds the Ellsberg papers, which were significantly damaging and a significant event. Really were small compared to what's happening here. And of course the reason it's huge is because of the Internet. The Internet has changed everything. So this isn't early 1970s when Dan Ellsberg released what he had in his files from working at the Pentagon, along with the release by the New York Times and the Washington Post. This is a massive, coordinated, systemic effort to provide an outlet for classified, secret, private correspondences that may reflect abuse of power on the part of companies, corporations, government, even religion. It's coordinated through multiple countries with secured multiple servers and mirror servers. It has funding. It's really quite an amazing project, and it has the powers to be absolutely petrified.
Well, does it? I don't know. I have questions about this whole thing, Steve. I don't want to get off topic here, but for anyone that doesn't know, the WikiLeaks has been in the news in the past few weeks, or the past few months, releasing what is supposed to be classified, really diplomatic memos. And I'm sure you know more about it than I do, Steve, but from what I've seen, I don't see anything particularly earth-shattering in any of these memos. You know, the king of this place wears army boots, or somebody says that, you know, somebody is kind of silly or doesn't take this issue seriously. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be all that earth-shattering to me. I mean,
it's like an embarrassing Christmas photo of the American government, basically.
Yeah, what are we missing here? Are we missing
what
something?
You're missing is that you're not. That is simply the latest release of thousands of diplomatic communiques.
Okay.
The WikiLeaks has been releasing material for 4 years.
I didn't know that, so much for my...
Much of that material has caused significant problems for various entities, though by and large it was not huge news. Assange emerged out of Australia. His history is interesting. You can find it on the internet. Julian Assange, Assange.
Yeah, the founder of WikiLeaks, right?
He is kind of a unique person in a lot of ways, and he has made the decision, along with his backers and supporters, to take on virtually the entire global power infrastructure. It's unprecedented, and I'm providing this context so that our comments about the UFO issue have meaning.
Sure.
Now, WikiLeaks does not become, he does not begin his ascent to worldwide status until WikiLeaks receives the documents and information from PFC Manning and the Iraq Theater. Now, understand, what they have published and what they have in their archives are not the same thing. It's not fully known what they have in toto. We only know what they have put out.
Mm-hmm.
It is that unknown, right, which is one of the things that has governments around the world extremely concerned. But he makes his major guest debut as a world figure when he puts out one of a number of encrypted videos that he received from Manning. And this particular video, which is still up, is which they had to decrypt, right? This encrypted video is of the incident in which our U.S. attack helicopters, gunships, killed about 14 or 15 Iraqis, including 2 Reuters reporters, in Baghdad. And it shows the event in full on camera, as well as the audio of the gunship pilots dealing with their ground troops. It's an extremely disturbing 36 minutes, and it upset the government quite a bit.
Yeah, understandably.
He has more of these videos, including the Afghan event, where we killed about 70 Afghanis, again, from these gunships, which have, I don't know if you know much about them, but they have guns shooting high-velocity, high-weight bullets that can virtually turn a person into hamburger.
Yeah, I have some experience with that, unfortunately.
Yeah, so this is the kind of stuff that they have, and the government's reaction is unprecedented. You have members of governments calling for his execution, his assassination. They are calling for draconian measures without trial, and so forth. So, without getting into the pluses and minuses here, and their arguments against this kind of activity, I understand them. And this kind of thing could possibly result in some people being killed.
Well, do you know Assange? I mean, what you're saying comes from, it sounds as though you're speaking, firsthand.
No. As a political activist engaged in a worldwide global truth movement, you can understand that when he emerges on the scene, I immediately made an effort to try to learn as much about him as I could.
Sure.
This is a major event going on here. What I'm trying to say is the emergence of WikiLeaks is a major event.
Okay. Well, that certainly seems to be the case.
It is not over. One of the things that WikiLeaks has done, and which has upset the states, and upset governments, and corporations are extremely worried as well. There's probably more potential for, how would you say, private documents addressing corporate abuse of power than there are government. Mm-hmm. There is a vast amount out there that could start making its way, if it hasn't already, into WikiLeaks' system.
Okay.
And so you have corporations which are suddenly confronted with the possibility that they're not going to be able to get out scot-free with some of their activities. So this is the beginning of what I view to be the counterinsurgency movement against the global corporate power matrix that has come to emerge in the second half of the 20th century, that is founded on secrecy. It is founded on the clandestine systemic approach, and is rife with abuses of power, exploitation, and is seriously corrupted. Not that there aren't good people involved, not that there aren't some of these institutions operating within a secrecy matrix are necessarily bad or are all doing bad things, but the totality of this kind of governance is absolutely bringing democracy to its knees and causing incredible angst worldwide, in which trust in institutions, in congresses, in parliaments, in media, in religion, are literally dropping like stones.
Okay. Well, yes, that's true. We're going to have to move into the UFO context because, unfortunately, we only have an hour here.
Sure.
So, Steve, please proceed with that. What do you have any information about what data will be released, or from which countries, or what?
Within this, with that as background, we have been waiting for years to find out whether or not WikiLeaks was going to address the UFO issue, which is the number one issue in the world, the most classified issue in the world, with a massive amount of materials in the hands of multiple countries that have not been released. Some people think, oh, gee, all the stuff is being released. Please. not even close.
No.
And we haven't heard anything. It's been silent. My feeling was that WikiLeaks had made a clear decision that it was not going to go there right away, that it had enough on its plate and was going to generate enough heat that it didn't need to go into that area. 4 years out, finally, that issue has been raised. And what we learned in an interview given to the Guardian newspaper on December 3rd, this is an online interview, one of those chats,
Yes.
is that Assange did three things. One, he let it be known they are receiving stuff about UFOs and a lot of other things, a lot of which is fringe and silly and useless to them. There should be no surprises there. I mean, no one should be shocked at all about that. And that for things to be useful, they need to have documents that are not being generated by the person submitting the material. In other words, people submitting their own documents is not helpful. And they need originals, or obviously as close to originals as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of set the bar there. I said, look, if you've got UFO stuff, you got to submit this type of these type of documents. And then he let the bomb drop, and that was that he let it be known that there is UFO references in some of the communiques, and there are still several 100,000 that have not yet been released. Which, in other words, what he's saying is there is UFO references in material we have in file. We haven't released it yet. Thus, he has put the world on notice to wait for that. He has created an enormous amount of global expectation there. But more importantly, he has now put the issue of this kind of operation in a UFO context so that he has sort of flipped that switch, and the invite is out to those who think they have relevant materials that they want to send.
All right. Well, let's. Well, Ben's got a question here that I think kind of cuts to the center of what our issues are here, because we're researchers too. But go ahead, Ben.
Okay. Do you think that the information would be more like the normal UFO stuff, like, oh, well, this person saw this, blah, 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 the government knows this about UFOs, or do you think it's something that's actually going to be, like, earth-shattering, like, completely different, like that the UFOs aren't, like, from outer space, that they're actually right next to us, like, all the time? And I'll ask my dad to explain what we think in a second. So would you explain our theory of the paranormal, too?
Well, I'm sure Steve's familiar with the multiverse theories, and that's how we operate, and it works for us. And it raises issues about whether UFOs are from other planets or from other dimensions, or both, you know. And how much does the government really know, as opposed to think, and how much are they attempting to use these for? You know, there are all sorts of questions that arise we don't have time to talk about.
Well, there's there's hundreds of thousands of questions.
Absolutely.
The vast majority of the
think?
answers to these questions are not going to be achieved until after disclosure.
Okay,
Simply not going to happen.
Leads us into the next part of the show. That's a big question.
What we are dealing with here is achieving disclosure. In other words, I'm involved in a disclosure movement. We are trying to convince the United States government to end the truth embargo and acknowledge the extraterrestrial presence. It's a simple thing. It's not complicated.
Mm-hmm.
We're not demanding that initially that they say anything specific about these ETs. We're not saying you must tell us immediately what planets they come from, but rather simply acknowledge that they exist. This is the disclosure event. So the question is, where is WikiLeaks in context here? WikiLeaks is in the document release business, and so I have no idea what they have, what they'll release if they stay consistent with their history so far. Is they will release documents from various sources that reference the UFO ET issue. Now, in order to understand how important that is, you have to understand that the ET question, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, doesn't need WikiLeaks to prove it. It's already proven many times over.
Mm-hmm.
The evidence for the extraterrestrial presence, wherever they're from, another dimension, another time, another planet system, is overwhelming. It's not, in my view, even debatable, though there are those who would love to debate it until the end of time. It's a done deal. And so the issue is not proving it. The issue is, again, advancing the disclosure process that gets the government to finally acknowledge it. And so any references that turn up in any documents released by WikiLeaks immediately can be then hooked back into the vast matrix of research that's already been done for the last 63 years. It's reinforcing. But more importantly, WikiLeaks is now a worldwide phenomenon. All eyes are turned that way. All governments are watching it. All corporations are watching it. And so anything now that comes out in that, in the UFO context, is going to be immediately seen, noticed, and commented on.
True. Yeah.
So that's not the case necessarily. I mean, we have all kinds of various groups that put out maybe a document or learn something and put it out on the internet, and it doesn't go anywhere. Different situation here with WikiLeaks. Plus, it's obvious that whatever they put out is going to connect the issue to some substantive person, some substantive organization, right? Which then opens the door for media to go to those organizations and entities and appropriate people and ask them, what about this document? You see, one of the principal reasons the truth embargo continues is that of the tens upon tens of thousands of reporters out there, there are virtually none who are yet willing to stand up in front of an official and ask an appropriate question based upon information that we have and confirmed. They simply won't do it. It's roughly the equivalent of every reporter in the United States taking an oath that they will no longer ask any questions about the Iraq or Afghanistan war to any official in the government.
Mm-hmm.
And so week after month, every meeting, every press conference, you would expect to see a question being asked. Nothing would be asked. And, of course, people would start to get very, very not only interested but angry about that. Mm-hmm. But that's exactly what's going on with this question. There are thousands of questions that could be asked of hosts of people, hundreds of people inside government, backed up by documentation and evidence, that should be answered. They're not even asked. WikiLeaks suddenly opens the door for those questions to be asked. This changes the dynamic substantially. But WikiLeaks is not alone. There are other developments in this emerging counterinsurgency. The Internet, of course, we know there are a number of websites that are starting to go after, I guess you could say, abuse of power, abuse of secrecy, manipulation, whatever. Some are better known than others. They have limited range.
Right.
But then you have the emergence of some television stuff, and probably the most notable is the Conspiracy Show with Jesse Ventura.
My wife loves it.
This I assumed was going to be a typical reality schlock show with a lot of hype, not much substance. Grab a few bucks from some advertising and split. No, that's not what it is. Ventura has apparently taken the bit between his teeth, and there is a story there as to why that may be the case. And he has, in just the two first rounds, and I forget the total number of shows, I think we're up to maybe 14, gone after just about every, with the exception of the UFO question, which he's, like WikiLeaks, holding off on. Though we know he's taken some interviews on this subject matter, but they haven't put it up yet. But he, like WikiLeaks, he is virtually ripping at every significant scab on every sore that the government has right now, and he's sticking it right in their face. It's remarkable to watch. I just never expected to see it.
Yeah.
And so the Conspiracy Show, which is on a limited view channel, Truth Television, this is obviously not a major channel, though I'm sure it's probably going to increase in ratings, but you can bet your bottom dollar that this show is being copied to death onto DVDs and recopied and sent around, and it's being YouTubed and archived. It's developing it's got a permanent afterlife, and they're not done yet. And so this is a real problem for government and for institutions that are abusing power. What are they going to do about Jesse Ventura? Now, with respect to Julian Assange, the first move they made was to try to remove his Australian passport. But they did give that back to him. He left for Belgium. He travels around all the time. He moves constantly. So that was the first move. Then he was denied citizenship or residency status in Sweden to keep him on the move. And then, of course, they made their major move, which is to almost certainly try to frame him onto rape charges. So this is serious business.
Yeah.
The one question one might obviously ask is, how is it conceivable that Julian Assange is still alive? Because the standard procedure is you simply kill him. And I think that is a reflection of the Internet. It's a reflection of how quickly one can become very well known globally. It's a reflection of preparation on their part. But in the past, someone like that would have been murdered very quickly.
That's it. Well, we have to take a commercial break now, Steve. We'll be right back on Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WON 1240 AM and ONWorldwide.com. Stay with us.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide.
Hi, Rick Pickard here. The great sounds of rock and roll is back every Sunday from 1 to 4. Memory Lane will be playing songs from the 50s and early 60s. Be part of the great memories and sounds. See you there.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide. ON Radio, ON Worldwide.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Bruno, and I would like you to join me and my friends every Sunday afternoon from 1 to 4, because the oldies are back on WOON. The Memory Lane Show, every Sunday afternoon from 1 to 4. Tell your friends that the oldies are back on WOON.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide.
Okay, we are back Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on ONWorldwide.com and WOON 1240 AM in New England's beautiful Blackstone Valley. Our fascinating guest today is Steve Bassett, UFO activist. Now, Steve, let's get a little deeper into the question. And I want to ask you this. Why is there anything to disclose? You've said very eloquently, and we certainly believe it as researchers ourselves, that the UFO question has really already been answered. It hasn't been answered in any depth. We still don't know what it is, but the fact that something is going on, something is being seen in the skies, something is abducting people or seeming to do so, we know that. But what is it that needs to be disclosed? And I should say it's not just what is it, but why does it need to be disclosed? What if the government really does know anything? What are they afraid of?
Well, this is the irony. We don't know what the government is afraid of because the government doesn't acknowledge there's anything even to fear. In other words, we're in the dark. We're in the closet. The government's operating in loco parentis as parent to us children.
Yeah.
We're simply not allowed to know the facts of this, and we can only guess, surmise, theorize, speculate, and in many cases just chase our own tails and go around in circles. This is not the democracy that Jefferson had in mind,
No, sir.
or any of the other founding fathers, and so it's dysfunctional and destructive. That's for opening. Secondly, the extraterrestrial presence is a fact. The government's awareness of it, the fact that it's aware of this presence, is a fact. That the government has embargoed the truths of this, or what it knows from the American people, is a fact. And certainly as of the last 8 to 9 years, based upon the amassing reports, the direct interaction between these beings and humans is a fact. These are 4 facts. These are the 4 fundamentals. Beyond that, we start to fall off into degrees of probability. There are thousands of cases and incidents and theories that are out there, but only those 4 things I have mentioned are fact, meaning they've been established. You need to go to a court of law on that. It's not even a close call. So after that, we have to assign degrees of probability. So do we know for absolute certainty they come from another planet system? No. Is the likelihood they come from another planet system extremely high? Oh, absolutely. It's up in the 90s. There's a tiny possibility they're from time. There's a tiny possibility they come from other dimensions. There's a massive probability they come from other planets. All right, so we're dealing with fact, which means that, and this is, I mean no offense here, but the ET issue is not paranormal. It's normal. It couldn't be more normal.
Well, all the paranormal is really normal.
From one point of view, you're right. There cannot be any such thing as paranormal. All right. The universe is what it is, and it is normal. So paranormal really means something different from what people think it means.
It means we're narrow thinkers who can't see anything outside the human context.
Well, paranormal refers to those aspects of the normal which sit on the edges or reside on the edges of our understanding and perceptual abilities.
In our comfort zone.
Right. It's like seeing somebody come over the horizon in a desert, and all you see initially is a tiny little speck. And until it gets closer, you have no idea what that speck is, what it wants, what it's doing, and so forth. And so the paranormal is those things on the perceptual horizon of the human race. If we would look at it that way, instead of ascribing to it so much, how would you say, mystical and I don't know, esoteric aspects, we probably would be more comfortable in general with this.
Oh, yeah.
So I understand that the idea of ghosts, for instance, where specters appear to people that may be of people who have passed away. This is something one can call paranormal and not feel too ambiguous about. And I appreciate that. But if in fact there are ghosts, they will in time be considered absolutely normal. I don't have no idea one way or the other. I'm trying to say that ETs are not in the context of ghosts. They're not in the context of even out-of-body experiences. They're flesh and blood. They are solid. They are real. They move through our space. They have agendas. They have activities. They have spacecraft. They have implements that they use. They are about as normal as a busload of tourists driving down Broadway in New York. They just are more advanced, more intelligent, and they come from somewhere else. And so this is important because I think by stripping away a lot of the mystery and esoteric qualities of this, I think one can start getting a little more comfortable with this a little sooner, which is necessary if we're going to advance this issue appropriately. So WikiLeaks is part of a very normal process in which the state is being confronted on what is withholding. Information is withholding from its citizens. And there's a range of things that the government withholds from us, a whole bunch of information, and there are various movements trying to get at that information from multiple directions. This is just one of them. It happens to be a pretty important one.
Well, let me nail a point here, Steve. Sorry to interrupt, but
go ahead.
It's just, from what we can see at this point, the U.S. government couldn't organize a game of checkers and get it right. Now, how do we know the government really knows anything about UFOs? This all isn't some cover-up or something else. I got chased across the desert near dear old Area 51 just because I was there. It's quite a story. But, I mean, something's going on there. But, I mean, all the evidence seems to be circumstantial that they know anything at all. I mean, what say you?
Well, when you make the statement the government couldn't organize a game of checkers, this is a statement. I hear this kind of statement often.
Yeah, I know.
But it's a statement that reflects much more the frustration that people have with government and its inability to deal with them straight, its inability to let them know what's going on, and their lack of distrust than it is a accurate reflection of government's capabilities. I can assure you, government which is not a monolith, but within government of the major nations, they have exceptional capabilities.
What makes you think it's the government?
Because the documents and the witnesses clearly indicate that.
Well, what if it's like larger than the government itself, and they're just parts of it?
Oh, well, let's assume that it is. But the point I'm trying to make is the government are not incompetent. They conduct extensive operations. They effectuate huge programs. They're capable of putting a space program and taking men to the moon. They have elaborate and very complex military structures and organizations. They can conduct wars worldwide. They're not stupid, and they're not incompetent. And I can assure you that with respect to the UFO ET issue, they have a highly sophisticated, very well-established, massive program that has been funded for years to address this phenomena and to keep this embargoed from us.
I hear you, Steve.
And so it's unwise to go there, because that's not the case. We need to respect government for its abilities and understand that we have a formidable task in convincing the government and altering their policies. And so they are able to, quote, contain this issue. They've done a masterful job of it. And that containment has got to be reversed. So so that the disclosure movement is up against this structure, these multiple structures that exist in countries around the world with virtually no funding, trying to change entrenched policy that's 60 years old.
Okay,
it is not easy, but ultimately will prevail.
Okay, no, I respect that. I'm sure you're correct. There's just something fishy about all of this. Now, we're primarily, quote-unquote, ghost researchers. I've been doing it for 40 years and only recently got into UFOs because we would run into UFOs in ghost cases. It's a long story. Is it possible that the government is giving us something we can grasp, people from other planets, to keep us in the dark about something we can't grasp?
It's certainly possible. I call this the awful truth scenario.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, I was going to do a show. Art Bell and I talked about my coming on to do a show in which he would raise all of the awful truths, the possible awful truths that are, quote, hidden behind this, and we would deal with them one by one. The upshot of this is that the theory is that there's something so awful that elements of our government know about that for our own good, they must keep that from us. Mm-hmm. Not only is it necessary for them to keep that awful truth from us, but they must keep a whole range of other things from us, lest we use those other things to get to that awful truth. In other words, they have to build a sort of concentric rings of deception around the core awful truth in order to protect the awful truth from the people, lest we all go nuts. I mean, this is a theory that's out there. It can't be ruled out, right? But the dilemma we have is this: the truth embargo, not only in the ET issue, but in a whole range of issues, and the rise of secrecy as a fundamental tool of the state and governance, not only in quote diplomacy with other nations, which is also a problem, but in direct governance to the citizens, is virtually destroying the social contract in the United States, and to some degree the social contracts in other countries. And so on the one hand, we have the situation where things are falling apart in virtually every direction that you look. When I say falling apart relative to where we were and where we could have gone, right? We're obviously not at the level of, say, the 1100s again, but we're going in the wrong direction. That with all of that happening around us, we're being told that, well, we really can't do anything about that, and we really can't tell you what's going on because there's some terrible truth that you can't know about. And I got to tell you, if you look at government's actions in history, there is not much basis for us to even believe that. All right, for openers, meaning there's no reason to believe it. Could be completely false. Just a simple justification for being able to operate from a secret platform, which makes it so much easier for government to get away with everything it gets away with. But then I'll go deeper than that. One moment. And I've made this case before. We are a species of people living on this planet, which is our home, which we don't take very well care of. We're dealing with a whole lot of issues and problems that are generations old, even thousands of years old. It's ripping us apart, right? And we are supposed to believe or accept that a limited number of individuals, not much better educated than most of us, certainly not brighter than many of us. The general population is filled with geniuses and absolute brilliant talent in every area of human understanding. But this limited group who have narrow educations, primarily military, sometimes economic, and they get into the intelligence services, that these individuals somehow have the spiritual and mental strength and capability to carry this awful truth on their shoulders for us, right, and to act for us and to address this issue for us. But we, on the other hand, should we know it, would simply come apart at the seams. And that is what we should accept, that we should not address what is the reality of this world as a species 6 billion strong, but rather we should have 5.999 billion of us living in the dark, clueless of what's going on, where a tiny few burden themselves with this terrible truth that they will then handle on our behalf. This is what we're asked to accept.
Quite
it's
a
completely
philosophical
unacceptable.
Question. Yeah.
Are you following me here?
Oh, yes, absolutely, yeah.
In other words, the idea that a limited number of people in government should deal with this awful truth while the rest of us remain in the dark is fundamentally bogus from the start. It is an act of huge hubris. It is probably wrong strategically, fundamentally, tactically. It's a mistake on every level. And yet they want to pose that as the justification. There is no justification, period, for any state to keep from its citizens the fundamental nature of reality, whatever that reality is. A giant comet heading our way, soon to impact in a couple of years, a species of extraterrestrials that live 100,000 light years away that view the human race as a delicacy, like, turtle meat that occasionally wants to come in and harvest some of us.
You might be very surprised.
Whatever it is, there is no justification for the state withholding that from the rest of the human race. It is against natural law, and in the end, it will fall apart and collapse on them. Whatever our fate as a planet and a species, it is absolutely essential that we meet that fate together as one, and not being led by the nose by a cabal of individuals we don't even know, with purposes we don't even know, that have ascribed to themselves this massive responsibility they haven't earned and don't deserve.
Well, I can't disagree with that. Not to beat a dead horse here, but just from a personal standpoint, whenever we cover UFOs on this show, and that's relatively frequently, whether it's on our CBS edition or here, many times there's unexplained interference. I don't know if you've had a chance ever to listen to any of our Rendlesham shows. We did 14 hours on the air commemorating the Rendlesham UFO incidents of 1980. We just finished that up. But we had to take it off CBS because it was absolutely, there'd be strange laughing. There'd be, you wouldn't believe what we went through with that. Weird military-type guys coming to our house, strange vans sitting outside. We get threats, as do other researchers and broadcasters, probably you too. It's almost too obvious. Could whoever this is be trying to draw attention to us instead of trying to dissuade us, meaning all of us, who are in this field?
Well, what was the period that you were having this kind of activity?
Well, it really started over a year ago. We started doing we started getting the show started to grow. We got on CBS, and of course here in New England we're well listened to, and we were having Stan Friedman and the usual suspects, and then we started getting into the Rendlesham business, which just as if anyone doesn't know, twin NATO bases in Suffolk, England, 1980. All absolutely amazing UFO incidents, landings, and it certainly ranks up there with Roswell, if not more important. And we had all the witnesses on, all the major witnesses, Colonel Halt and Larry Warren and all those fellas. And we have done so far 14 hours of shows on this, and strange things started to happen. And as you know yourself, Steve, and I served in the military, did some strange things, and if they want to take you out, you're gone.
Of course.
They don't have to create interference. They don't have to do any strange things. They don't have to send guys to your houses in vans.
Right.
They don't have to do any of that. Question is, why do they do it?
It's more of an encouragement, I think, because it's like poking you and prodding you into doing something, like trying to intimidate you out of it, but trying to intimidate you into doing it even more. I don't know.
Yeah, hey, we must be on the right track if they're getting nervous.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you. You say you had threats. Can you give me an example of a threat that you received?
Well, some of them were email. Most of them have been emails, 1 or 2 phone calls. This is over the last year and a half, and I haven't shared these with Bangs. I don't want to upset him, or certainly not with my wife. And
I don't get upset by these things. You should know.
No, I know. Well, you've come a long way in the last year.
Yeah.
Essentially, it was several have said, you are close to the truth, back off, or they're going to get you.
Yeah, right.
That sort of thing.
Well, let me give your listeners at least a perspective on this. Having been involved in this since '96 and now for 14 years, the last serious efforts to really mess with the people and the issues in this field, or the people in this field, ran from late 1996 to near the end of 1999. It's about a 3-year period, and it was fairly unpleasant. And I think I know the reasons that triggered that. But in the end of 1999, starting in 2000, it seemed to end. And by and large, it has been not a factor for the last 10 years. We know this because, well, first of all, I know most of the researchers, and generally if something's happening, they tend to tell you. There have been few reports. The host of witnesses have come forward, of course, in the last 15 years, and there's been absolute minimal interference with them, threats, intimidation, what have you. I'm not saying that someone's wife, a spouse, might not get upset, but I'm talking about interference from outside sources, particularly government. And so it confirms what we believe to be the case in that within government, within the various elements of government that address this issue, the consensus is actually towards disclosure. That doesn't mean that everybody on every committee is ready to disclose tomorrow, but rather the consensus, the majority, is to move forward. And with the majority in favor of moving forward toward disclosure, obviously that makes it a little difficult for those in the minority to go off and do rogue intimidation operations or overt disinformation or threats and what have you. And so overall, we're kind of past that. Now, let me make a second point. This is not true of all areas. There are still various subjects that if you want to get into as a researcher, as a journalist, you can be in trouble. Probably a classic example of this is the relationship between drug running around the world and the CIA. You go into that room, and you could be in trouble. And there are others, which is simply to say that one of the natural outcomes of creating a vast secret empire is that it opens the door wide for abuse of power from any number of compartmentalized operations within that empire. So there's no surprising there. And until we reform the secret empire, this is going to continue, if not get worse. But with the UFO issue, no. Now, in your case, I'm interested, and I think, first of all, let me commend you. Doing 14 hours on Rendlesham and bringing all those witnesses on was a very significant effort on your part, and to be applauded. This is one of the most important cases. One could make the case it's the most important case of our time, and ultimately could be one of the threads that unravels the truth embargo. And so by doing that, you did attract some attention. Unfortunately, in the modern world with the internet and everything else, where anybody can send a threat or anybody can pose, it's very difficult to know when you're getting something that's coming from a true authoritative source or government source, or where you're getting somebody that's just out there trying to make a case or make a statement or even have fun with you.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Though if a van turns up outside of your door, and by the way, let me also say that after 60 years of interference in this issue, nobody should be faulted for perhaps mistaking a utility van parked across the street that's there to fix somebody's plumbing with possibly surveillance. I mean, we have more than enough reasons to be somewhat
paranoid.
Careful,
Yeah.
and even paranoid about this. That's understandable. So we're going to misunderstand some things, but it's better to be safe than sorry. And I encourage people to be on the lookout and to be careful.
Well, we checked IDs, and they weren't from where they said they were, that sort of thing. Well, let me just shift, because we're almost out of time here, Steve. I wanted to just ask, have you ever had a UFO experience yourself?
No, interesting, and this is one of the interesting things about my trajectory here, which I think about a great deal. In the 14, I've never had a UFO experience. I've never had contact. I've never had a significant sighting. And in the 14 years that I have been pursuing this advocacy, I have never been threatened. There's been no acts of intimidation or harassment. Very possible I've been surveilled, meaning phone surveillance or what have you. I've always assumed that, and I make no efforts whatsoever to encrypt or screen what I do. Why that is, I can only speculate. And so I have to be careful, because it may be not reflective of what some other people are going through. Though again, I can say I carefully monitor what's happening, and since 2000, there has been a minimum of that kind of interference, which is a good sign. Because, look, let me make it clear to your listeners. Disclosure is coming, and it is very close. And so we're kind of in the last days of the truth embargo with respect to the ET issue. There are other embargoes. That's another matter for another day. And so don't be surprised if, as we get close to the end of the embargo, that the knives are being put back in their sheaths, preparations are being made to live in the post-disclosure world, and the government, not surprisingly, might get out of the disruption business. This shouldn't shock anybody, and so I think this is just one of the many signals indicating we're near the end of this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where it's all going to go, whether we're going to have the massive reform movement we need to redress the abuse of secrecy and power in not only the United States but in other first world governments, that it remains to be seen. It's a matter of how much people are willing to invest in getting their government right. But they'll have an enormous opportunity, I believe, triggered by the disclosure event, and one of the goals of the disclosure movement is to get people primed to think that way and to start joining the game here and getting involved and see if we can sort of restructure things so that in the post-disclosure world things start working again. And so there's a lot at stake here, and it's a political movement at its core. But I'm fundamentally optimistic that we are moving in the right direction.
Well, I hope you're right. And we're out of time, I'm afraid. And just give your main website again so folks can find out more. And
everybody can get to me through ParadigmResearchGroup.org, or just Google my name, Stephen Bassett. It all comes up, and you can find links to other reports, other projects, and activists, and books, and all kinds of stuff. There's a huge movement developing here. A lot of people involved, all good people. And I do believe we are going to prevail, and you guys are playing your role, and I admire you and look forward to coming back and doing your show again.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. We'll be in touch off the air, and thank you for a fascinating conversation. We'll be talking to you soon.
My pleasure.
Very good. Okay, folks, before we end the show, I wanted to get to a quick news item here. A lot of people heard about the NASA revelation that supposedly occurred this past week. The people were saying, aha, it's of interest to the ET community and all this business. Well, what it turned out to be was the discovery of a form of bacteria that can thrive on arsenic.
Told you it would be bacteria. I told you.
Well, all right.
It's like, oh yeah, we have a crazy revelation everyone's going to love.
I never said that.
Well, it's basically what they were saying.
Well, yeah, that's what they were implying anyway. And this thing didn't even turn out to be on another planet. I figured, well, maybe they got some more microbes on Mars or something. But this was something that was in Southern California or someplace, some sort of alkaline lake, and these things are feeding it. And it makes me laugh because we're always talking about life. Life, in our experience, is everywhere, every when, in all kinds of different forms that we don't even suspect. And we crawl around on Mars spending billions of dollars looking for life that's like us. Well, what about life that's not like us? And everybody falls down in a faint and has the mystical experience when you find some kind of microbe that feeds on something we don't expect it to feed on. And I think it's laughable. I mean, it's wonderful to discover new forms of life. But our definition of life is far, far too narrow, in my opinion, anyway. So, this is, again, NASA. And people were making fun of NASA because they're so broke they can't even go to other planets. They have to look in California. Anyway, we draw your attention to our website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can buy my books, you can subscribe to our newsletter, or you can apply to become a reporter for our show. We have a number of reporters now. We have 7 who can call in and report stuff that's going on in their own area in the paranormal realm.
Okay, so podcasts of all our shows are available at www.BehindTheParanormal.com. Well
over 200, because we don't number the internet shows, really. We just so there are lots and lots of podcasts to listen to. Many thanks to our wonderful producer, Craig Pelletier. We'll see you right here next Monday, December 13th on WOON 1240 AM and ONWorldwide.com, when the guest will be our old friend, author, astrologer, and psychic medium, Susan Shepard, and our subject, astrology, something we've never done a show on before.
I was going to say that.
Sorry.
And, yeah, see? And our CBS radio edition of Behind the Paranormal is on next Sunday. It's December 12th. My dad will take the hour to take us deeper inside his famous Village of Voices case to areas he has never spoken about before. And that will be at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific on CBS New Sky Radio in Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Seattle, and online at www.newskyradio.com.
And we leave you with a thought from that old sweetheart Confucius. Quote, 3 things cannot long be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth.
Thanks for sailing with us on our cosmic journey, and we'll see you next time.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.